I grew up in Aurora, Colorado, with parents who could win medals for worrying. You'll forget to lock the door. You'll open it to a stranger and get robbed. They always imagined the worst. Maybe it was their own trauma talking, or maybe they just couldn't see me as an independent adult. Either way, it drove me crazy. I needed to prove them wrong. So when I turned 20 in June of 2023, I jumped at the chance to move out. I found a tiny studio apartment not far from Aurora Community College, where I was taking part-time classes. It wasn't much. Creaky front door, stained beige walls, and a kitchenette that barely fit a microwave, but it was mine. My own little slice of freedom. The first few weeks were normal. I filled the place with Craigslist furniture, cheap string lights, and posters to make it feel like home. I even brought my old TV, a boxy, flickering thing with speakers that crackled every time a movie had bass. It was practically a fossil, so I listed it on Craigslist, just $75. Within hours, I had a handful of offers, but one message stood out. A guy named Henry offered $100, no negotiation. He said he wanted to pick it up immediately. I'd clearly written in the listing that I was open to haggling, but he didn't even try. It felt off. My parents' voices echoed in the back of my mind. Don't open the door to strangers. Still, I didn't want to chicken out. I wanted to handle things like an adult. I even considered asking my friend Lila to hang out during the pickup. But then I thought, no, I can do this. We agreed on Thursday at 11 a.m. That morning. I cleaned up, set the TV by the door, and even texted Henry to confirm. No response. I waited an hour. Nothing. Annoyed, I went on with my day. Then classes and midterms swallowed up the rest of my week. On the Sunday night, on June 25th, I was getting ready for bed when my doorbell rang. It was almost midnight. Instant unease. A second later, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Hey, it's Henry. I'm at your door. Sorry it's late. My pulse spiked. I tiptoed to the door and peeked through the peephole. 3 men. I recognized Henry, barely, from the tiny profile pic he'd sent. But the other 2 were bulkier, unfamiliar, looming. My gut twisted. I texted back. Too late to do this now. Can we do it in the morning? Almost immediately. Okay, I'm so sorry. I'll come by tomorrow at 9 a.m. I could hear them mumbling outside before they finally left. I waited until I was sure they were gone, then backed away from the door, hands trembling. But the dread clung to me. At around 2 a.m., just as sleep was about to pull me under. Boom! A violent body-slamming thud against my door. I jolted upright, paralyzed. Another hit. Louder. Then came the sickening sound of wood cracking. They were breaking in. I snatched my phone and crept toward the door, heart in my throat. The frame splintered. The door burst open. Henry came in first, face twisted with adrenaline. The 2 others followed, silent and massive. I screamed and ran, slamming my bedroom door shut, then bolting into the bathroom and locking that one too. 2 layers. It was all I had. I fumbled my phone 3 times before dialing 911. The operator's calm voice grounded me just enough to whisper what was happening. I could hear them tearing through my apartment, footsteps, shouts, crashing. One of them kicked something hard. I couldn't tell if it was the bedroom door or my closet. Time melted. Then, sirens. Yelling. Footsteps pounding through the hall. Then, silence. Cautiously, I stepped out of the bathroom. Police were in my living room. One of them took my arm and led me outside. My front door hung off its hinges. My apartment was ransacked. TV wires, overturned drawers, my jewelry box cracked open. Later that night, the police told me they caught all 3 men trying to escape with a duffel bag full of my stuff, my laptop, games, even some cheap jewelry. They said Henry and his friends had a history, suspected in a string of Craigslist scams across Aurora and Denver. Their method? Offer more money than the asking price. Target people living alone, mostly women. show up late, force entry if needed. I'd almost walked right into it. I'd been so desperate to prove my independence I ignored every warning sign. One officer handed me a pair of earrings they'd recovered from the sidewalk. He looked at me and said gently, "You got lucky." We showed up just in time. I didn't feel lucky. I felt stupid, violated, small. By sunrise, I was sitting in my wrecked apartment, staring at the spot where my door used to be, and all I could hear in my head was my mom's voice. "You can't be too careful." She was right. They both were. That feeling, the creeping vulnerability, the eerie sense that someone might test your locks again one night, never really leaves you. Not when you've seen what's out there. Not when you've looked friendly Craigslist buyer in the face and seen a predator instead. The worst part? I almost let them in, all because I wanted to prove something. I always dreamed of being a quarterback. Growing up under the scorching sun of Phoenix, Arizona, I imagined myself throwing game-winning passes under Friday night lights. But my father, retired Army captain, sharp as steel and twice as cold, believed in discipline above all else. He saw potential in me, just not on the football field. By 18, instead of a college tryout, I found myself stepping into the local police academy. One uniform traded for another. I won't lie. Sometimes I think about what could have been. But law enforcement offered structure, purpose, and strangely enough, comfort. My father and I clashed constantly, but he was proud when I pinned on that badge. Years passed. I rose through the ranks, eventually becoming a detective with the Phoenix PD, focused on organized crime. Then came May of 2007, a month that still echoes in my bones. At 2 a.m. on a moonless stretch of road in Maricopa County, I pulled over a white Chevy Suburban idling without headlights. My gut told me something was off. That's when I met Ronnie Red Alvarez, the rumored ringleader of a violent burglary gang. Alone, I cuffed him. It felt like winning the championship I never got to play in. But the victory didn't last. A week later, my 9-year-old son, Connor, vanished. At first, I figured he stayed late for soccer. When the school confirmed he'd never left the building, panic ripped through me like shrapnel. I combed every hallway. Nothing. We issued an alert, started a citywide search. The FBI joined. Still no trace, no ransom, no demands, just silence. The 6th day brought the first real lead. Someone whispered Alvarez's crew might be involved. Retaliation, a warning. I went all in, chasing ghosts, shaking old informants, burning through liads that led nowhere. Every night, I stared at the ceiling fan spinning above me, hearing nothing but the echo of Connor's laugh in my memory. Then came the 10th night. Ava, my wife, was staying at her sister's for a break from the dread-filled silence. I was alone, sorting through old files, clinging to a hope that maybe I missed something. Around midnight, I heard a sound, soft, almost dismissive, a thump from the basement. My pulse spiked. The door to the basement, down the hallway near the kitchen, hadn't been opened in days. I grabbed my flashlight and descended the stairs slowly, each creak of the wood boards whispering dread into my ears. The light flickered on. Everything looked normal. Dusty bins, boxes of holiday junk, an old coffee table we meant to throw out. Then, another sound, a muffled whimper. Behind the boxes, I moved slowly, breath held. And there he was, Connor, tied, gagged, and terrified. His eyes met mine, wide, desperate, alive. I froze. Time stopped. Then I moved, fast, clumsy with adrenaline. I tore the gag away, freed his hands, and he collapsed into me, trembling so hard I could feel it in my bones. His voice was raw. "Jackson," he whispered. It was Jackson. Jackson, the housemaid we'd hired through an agency, quiet, reliable, unassuming, trusted, a wolf in the walls. Connor told me Jackson picked him up from school like normal, but took him somewhere unfamiliar, locked him away. And while Connor never saw the place clearly, he remembered them talking about me, about revenge. I tore through the house, gun drawn, nothing. Jackson was gone. Police swarmed the property, no sign of him. It was like he'd evaporated, and then we learned the worst. Jackson wasn't real. No agency, no records, just a mask worn by a man with a history, an ex-con tied to Alvarez's gang. He'd embedded himself in our home, lurked in our routine, waited. 2 weeks later, a hiker reported someone creeping around an abandoned hunting cabin deep in Tonto National Forest. My partner and I led the raid. The cabin was rotted and broken, the air inside sharp with mildew, and something darker. We found him. Jackson. He reached for a weapon. We reached faster. He said nothing, just stared at me with hollow eyes, calm as still water. That stare haunts me more than anything else, because it wasn't rage I saw. It was satisfaction. Mission accomplished. Alvarez stayed silent. Jackson refused to talk. The case folded into a larger federal investigation, but the damage was done. We sold the house. Connor won't sleep alone. Ava flinches at every knock on the door. And me, I hear things. Every night, the house settling, the floor creaking. I grip my gun, check the windows, make sure the locks are set, because I know what most don't. They're still out there, blending in, smiling, waiting. And I keep asking myself, if I, a detective, could let a monster into my own home, how many others already have? I started the night shift at a small warehouse just outside Sacramento in April 2022. The hours, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., weren't too bad. If anything, I kind of liked it. The warehouse was quiet at night, eerily peaceful, with just a few of us shuffling between racks, packing boxes, and scanning inventory under dim fluorescent lights. Mike Evans was our manager. Late 40s, wire-rimmed glasses, always in crisp button-ups and worn jeans. He had this calm, dad-like presence. The kind of guy who made you feel like everything was under control. On my first night, he gave me a firm handshake, a warm smile, and walked me through the whole place like I was joining a family. Not a late-night logistics crew. For months, it was just routine. Clock in, coffee, handle shipments, joke around with co-workers. Mike would hang around till midnight, sometimes later, bringing us snacks, chatting like a friend. The warehouse felt safe until it didn't. By late August, something shifted. Mike started staying later, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., holed up in his office with the blinds drawn tight. He stopped smiling as much. His warmth faded, replaced by muttered curses and sharp sighs. One night I stepped out back for air and saw his truck, parked way out by the dumpsters. That wasn't normal. He was inside, phone pressed to his ear, shouting. His face was twisted, red, unfamiliar, furious. I backed away before he saw me. After that, everything spiraled. He'd show up past midnight and vanish into his office without a word. He snapped at us over tiny mistakes. The man who used to hand out donuts now barely made eye contact. Rumors started to spread. Shady visitors in the dead of night, unmarked vans. Alex, a co-worker, swore he saw Mike handing off sealed boxes at 4 a.m. It sounded like paranoia. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. Then came the night in October, right before Halloween. I'd stayed late to clear out backlog. Around 4:30 a.m., I heard muffled voices coming from Mike's office. The door was slightly ajar. I crept closer, heart pounding. Inside were two men I'd never seen, both rough-looking, street-worn. They stood with Mike, hunched over a desk covered in stacks of cash. Mike's eyes were cold, dead even. I didn't recognize him. I backed away before they noticed and pretended to be busy until I could leave. The next day, Mike was all smiles again, offering coffee like nothing had happened. But something had. Not long after, Alex quit without warning, barely said goodbye. I think he knew more than he let on. Then came that night in November. I was alone, finishing logs. It was nearly 4 a.m. No one else was scheduled. The warehouse was silent until the loading dock door creaked open. Footsteps, heavy, slow, coming straight down the aisle. I ducked behind a shelving unit, hand wrapped around a box cutter, heart racing. The steps stopped near Mike's office. Keys jingled. I peeked, just a sliver. It was Mike. He looked wrecked, pale, hair disheveled, shirt untucked. He fumbled into his office and tore through drawers like a madman. Papers flew. A loud crash, then silence. He emerged minutes later, clutching a thick envelope to his chest, eyes wild. He glanced around, maybe checking if someone saw, then vanished into the night. That was the last we ever saw of him. Police came weeks later, said Mike had been using the warehouse to move stolen goods, part of some bigger operation. None of us knew the full story. No one ever found Mike. I quit shortly after. Couldn't shake the feeling that someone might come looking for him or what he left behind. Even now, when I'm alone at night, especially during late campus shifts or long solo study sessions, I remember his smile, his kindness, and I wonder, how many faces do people hide? How close have we come to something dangerous without even realizing it? Because the scariest monsters don't always lurk in the shadows. Sometimes they smile and bring you coffee. I'm writing this in January of 2021, just over a year since it happened. And even now, just thinking about it tightens that same knot in my stomach. My name's Darren. Back in late 2019, I was finishing my senior year of college, living just outside Syracuse, New York. I was juggling a part-time job at a local grocery store and scraping together time for final projects. Life was normal. Then one night, my friend Mitch sent me a link to a thread on this obscure urban exploration forum. The post was about an abandoned textile warehouse near downtown, supposedly left untouched since the 80s. Nothing unusual there except the post mentioned strange noises coming from inside at night. Some blamed rats, others said squatters, a few hinted at other things. I've always been drawn to forgotten places. The silence, the decay, the unanswered questions, they fascinate me. Mitch was the same way, so of course we made plans to check it out that Friday. We didn't tell anyone. We knew it was stupid, but we were too curious to care. That night we parked a block away on a deserted side street. The air was cold enough to sting our lungs, and the sky hung low, an endless stretch of gray. The warehouse towered over us like a corpse of industry, 5 stories tall, with broken windows and graffiti clawing at its walls. The front doors were chained shut with a heavy padlock, but we found a busted-out window on the side, just big enough to slip through. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and rot. Our flashlights sliced through the dark, illuminating swirling dust and rusting machines left to decay. Broken drywall littered the floor, and collapsed ceiling panels groaned under their own weight. We whispered without meaning to. It just felt wrong to speak at full volume, like the building might hear us. On the first floor, we found old offices with yellowed paper scattered across moldy desks. I picked up a ledger from 1978 detailing fabric shipments. Holding that piece of history made the place feel disturbingly real. People had worked here, laughed, typed away on those desks. And then one day, it all stopped. We found a creaky metal staircase near the back and climbed to the second floor. Every step groaned under our weight, the echoes too loud in that empty space. The second floor was a massive room lined with overturned sewing tables and shattered windows. Sheets of torn plastic flapped from the ceiling, swaying in a silent, invisible rhythm. The whole place felt frozen in time. haunted not by ghosts, but by abandonment itself. That's when we found the elevator shaft. The elevator was gone, just a black hole yawning downward. Mitch tossed a chunk of debris into it. We counted, 4 seconds before we heard it hit bottom. We quickly moved on. It was on the 3rd floor that things changed. The air felt heavier, colder. We spotted footprints in the thick dust, a trail that wasn't ours. The prints were deep, recent, and they led into a side hallway. Without speaking, we followed. The corridor was long and narrow, dimly lit by the dying light bleeding through shattered windows. At the end was a door, slightly ajar, with something metallic glinting near the floor. Then we noticed the footprints stopped, right in the middle of the hallway. No side room, no stairwell, just stopped. I felt something tighten in my chest. Mitch pointed down. A flashlight lay on the ground, half buried in dust. I picked it up. It still worked, barely. A weak flicker buzzed to life when I pressed the button. That's when we heard it. A burn scraping sound from beyond the door. Slow, heavy, like metal being dragged across concrete. We froze. Mitch motioned to kill the lights. I did. And in that sudden darkness, we just stood there, listening. The scraping continued, measured, deliberate. Then it stopped. Silence. Thick. Complete. I peered into the gloom. The door at the end of the hallway was open, just a crack. Inside, there was no light, just pure, unnatural black. Something inside me screamed not to move, not to speak. Mitch tapped my arm, signaling we should leave. And for once, I didn't argue. We turned around and moved, fast, but quiet, back the way we came. My legs were shaking. My palms were soaked with sweat. We didn't stop until we hit the 1st floor. Once outside, we ran the block back to the car without looking back. Only after we slammed the doors shut and locked them did I finally ask, "Did you see anyone?" Mitch just shook his head. We drove home in silence. We never went back. Later I tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was a squatter, someone dragging a pipe or a piece of scrap. But the footprints, they just vanished. Not faded, not smudged. Gone. And that flashlight, why drop it if it still worked? Unless something made them. My name is Kyle. In October 2022, I was 24, juggling a part-time job while finishing my senior year of college. I lived in a cramped apartment just outside of Louisville, Kentucky, barely scraping by. So buying secondhand was pretty much the norm for me. That's how I ended up on Craigslist. I was hunting for a decent TV, and a friend recommended I check there. I hadn't really used it before, but after scrolling for a bit, I found a nearly new Samsung going for dirt cheap. It almost felt too good to be true. The seller went by James. He seemed normal enough over text, polite, responsive. He even sent photos of the TV, plugged in and streaming Netflix. Everything looked legit. We agreed to meet Wednesday night, around 9:30 p.m., in the parking lot of an old strip mall on the edge of town. He picked the spot, said it was quiet, but safe and public enough. When I pulled into the lot, the place gave me the creeps. The lot had been empty for months. The only light came from a flickering street lamp and the gas station glowing faintly across the road. It was eerily still, too still. I parked under the lamp and checked my phone. James. On my way, just running a little late. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. The silence was pressing in, broken only by the occasional whoosh of passing cars on the main road. I tried to brush it off, told myself I was just being paranoid, but deep down, my gut was warning me. Then a dark SUV rolled in, slow and silent, headlights off. It parked at the far end of the lot near a shuttered grocery store. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside. Nobody got out for a long moment. Then finally the driver's door creaked open. A tall guy stepped out. He didn't walk over. He just stood there watching. Then he raised a hand and gave a casual wave and motioned for me to come to him. I hesitated. Everything in me screamed to leave, but I told myself this was just some guy selling a TV. I needed it. I wanted it. I forced my legs to move. As I got closer, I noticed James kept glancing around, like he was making sure no one else was watching. When he saw I was alone, something in his body language shifted, subtle but chilling. The back door of the SUV was open, and a cardboard box sat inside. It looked like it could hold a TV. James gave me a tight smile and stepped aside to let me check it out. I leaned in. The screen was coated in a fine layer of dust, like it had been sitting untouched for weeks. Not like the polished, powered-on TV in the photos. Something was wrong. My instincts screamed it. And then I felt it. Something cold pressed firmly against my lower back. Not hard, but certain. Real. I froze. James leaned in slightly and whispered, voice calm and clinical. "Wallet, phone, keys." No anger, no threat, just routine. Hands trembling, I obeyed. He took everything with practiced ease. Then without a word, he shoved me hard. I stumbled forward and crashed onto the asphalt, knees burning from the scrape. Behind me, I heard the SUV door slam shut. Tires screeched, and then nothing. Just the flicker of the street lamp and the sting of gravel in my palms. I looked down. My phone was still in my hand. Adrenaline surged. I called the police with shaking fingers, breath catching in my throat. They arrived quickly. I gave them my statement, but I saw it in their eyes. They didn't expect to catch him. No plates, no good description, just another Craigslist scam. Days passed. I tried to move on, chalk it up as a lesson learned. Then while clearing messages from my phone, I found the photos James had sent, the ones of the TV. I paused, something catching my eye in one of them, a reflection, barely visible on the TV screen, a silhouette standing behind James, partially hidden in shadow. They were holding something, long, thin, almost blade-like. I stared at it for a long time, heart pounding in my ears. There had been someone else there that night, waiting, watching. And suddenly the cold metal against my back didn't feel like a gun anymore. It felt like something worse, like a warning or a mercy. My name is Matt Reynolds. I'm a junior at the University of Colorado Boulder. Most days bleed into each other. Wake up too early, skip breakfast, sprint across campus for an 8 a.m. lecture. I sit through droning PowerPoints, spend hours buried in books at the library, and exchange nothing more than nods or mumbled haze in the hallway. I've never really clicked with anyone, but on my 22nd birthday, December 2nd, 2023, that emptiness hit like a gut punch. No party, no texts, not even a single call, just me. I needed to escape. I told myself a solo camping trip might help, something spontaneous. My dad used to rave about Roosevelt National Forest, how the wild could reset your soul. It sounded stupid, but I packed my old Honda Civic anyway. Tent, some snacks, a sleeping bag. Most importantly, I brought Clyde, my scruffy mutt, my only real friend since high school. He was always there, tail wagging like he didn't notice I was drowning inside. We got to the forest just before dusk. The sky was heavy, bruised with thick snow clouds. I set up camp beneath towering pines, while Clyde darted through the underbrush, sniffing everything like we'd just found paradise. I should have been happy for him. Instead, I felt this gnawing pit in my stomach. Guilt, maybe, for dragging him into the cold, into this. As darkness folded over the trees, I got a fire going. The crackling flames barely cut through the forest gloom. I remember wishing my dad was there. He'd always talked about giving me his old hunting rifle. For protection, he'd said, but I waved him off like I didn't need it. God, I wished I had taken it. That's when Clyde started growling, low, guttural. Not play growling. This was different. He was fixed on the tree line, his ears stiff, his whole body coiled like a loaded spring. I followed his gaze and saw nothing, just the dancing shadows of firelight flickering through the trees, and then 2 glints, small, bright, and far too high off the ground to be a raccoon or deer, just hovering. I stared, heart pounding. The glints blinked, eyes. Clyde barked sharply, inching forward, teeth bared. I reached for something, anything, but the only thing in my hands was useless warmth from the fire. The eyes crept closer, slow and deliberate. That's when it stepped into view. Tall, lean, muscular, a mountain lion, bigger than I ever imagined, its fur glowing faintly gold in the firelight, its eyes locked onto me like I was prey. It lunged. Clyde moved before I even stood. He charged, this small, loyal blur of fur and fury, and met the beast head on. The sounds that followed were chaos, snarling, barking, a yelp that still haunts my dreams. In the flickering firelight, I saw the lion clamp its jaws around Clyde and drag him into the trees. Then, silence. My legs wouldn't move. My throat was a dry knot. I just stood there, frozen. I whispered his name, then shouted it again and again. But all that came back was the empty rustle of branches. The fire died slowly as I sat there through the night. I didn't sleep. I barely breathed. Every crack of a twig made me flinch. I kept expecting those glowing eyes to return, maybe with blood on their fur. By morning, the campsite looked like a war zone. My backpack lay spilled open, half my gear scattered across the frost-bitten ground. I packed what I could with shaking hands, still glancing toward the trees. No sign of Clyde, no trail of blood, no body, just gone. I drove home in silence, the passenger seat painfully empty. Since that day, sleep rarely comes easy. When it does, I dream of those eyes, watching, waiting. I still listen at night for Clyde's soft steps, or the gentle thump of his tail against my doorframe. But there's only silence, and in that silence, something lingers. Not just grief, not just guilt, something else, like whatever stared at me from the shadows that night, never left. I live in a quiet apartment complex near a golf club on the edge of town. It's tucked against a small hill, and at night, the silence can get thick, like the whole place is holding its breath. My unit sits on the back corner of the building, ground floor. That means the bottom edges of my windows, living room and both bedrooms, are only a few inches above the dirt outside. There's a trail behind my building that cuts through a thin patch of woods, and while it sounds peaceful, it just adds to the feeling of isolation. My living room faces a strip of grass, maybe 15 or 20 feet wide, then a tree line, and beyond that, a row of houses on the next street. Last summer, a family moved into one of those houses. I've only ever seen one man, a middle-aged guy, and his dog. The first time I noticed him, I was outside with my Shih Tzu, Harley. He was standing alone in his backyard, arms crossed, swaying gently side to side. He looked like an NPC from an old video game, waiting to be triggered into motion. We made eye contact. I gave him a quick, awkward wave. He didn't wave back, just stared. I figured maybe he was curious because we had the same dog breed, and maybe he was considering letting them meet, but it struck me as odd that his dog wasn't outside with him. Later, my younger brother, who lives in an upstairs unit in the same complex, mentioned something weird. He said he'd seen that guy before, walking his dog past the tree line and into our complex yard, but instead of heading anywhere, he'd just linger, circle slowly near the buildings, a little too close for comfort, before heading back home. Things escalated in September. My boyfriend and I had just broken up. The night he left, I went to a friend's place for a bit. Just needed some space. I didn't want to leave Harley alone too long, so I came back after about an hour and passed out on the couch with one of those black screen rain sound videos playing on YouTube. Around 2 a.m., Harley lost it, barking, growling, climbing up the couch that sits directly under my living room window. Half asleep, I stumbled over to calm her down. That's when I noticed it. Something was blocking the faint glow of the distant streetlights that usually leaked through the thin curtains. A shape, a black mass, pressed up against the window. Heart pounding, I shut the TV off with the remote. It was one of those old-style screens where the image shrinks into a small flash before going black. That flash lit up the living room for just a second, but it was enough. There was someone right there, crouched, wearing dark clothes, face practically against the glass, looking in. He must have seen me in the flash because he bolted. I grabbed Harley and a kitchen knife and locked myself in my bedroom. Texted my ex in a panic, asking if it was him. He swore it wasn't, said he was over an hour away at a friend's house, sent me his live location as proof, told me to call the cops either way. The police came, looked around, found nothing, said they'd patrol the area, and told me to call again if anything else happened. And it did happen. Almost every night for the next few weeks, between 2 and 3 a.m., Harley would go off again at the same window. I'd rush over, but there'd be no one there by the time I looked. Fast forward to May 2024. I was clearing out my storage closet and found some of my ex's stuff. He came by to pick it up while I was out with friends. A while later, he texted me, asking me to come home. Said something weird had happened. When I got back, he looked shaken. He told me that while he was loading his stuff into the truck, he took Harley out for a quick walk. An older woman who lives on the second floor stopped him. She told him that earlier that evening while she was throwing out her trash, she heard a twig snap from the side of the building near my living room window. When she looked over, she saw a man standing there. He wasn't just walking by. He was right up against the glass, one hand shielding the light, the other holding a phone pointed inside. She shouted at him, asking what the hell he was doing. He didn't flinch, just turned slowly and walked away, like he hadn't even heard her. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just random. Someone had been watching me, waiting, recording. Needless to say, I finally installed a Ring camera. I should have done it ages ago, but still, knowing someone was peering into my life, into my home, recording me like I was a show for them, it changed everything. Now I sleep with the blinds down, the doors locked twice over, and Harley curled up beside me like my own little security alarm. But sometimes, I still hear twigs snapping just outside my window. Every Halloween, our neighborhood transforms into a festival of lights, laughter, and eerie delight. Over the years, it's become a beloved tradition. Food trucks lining the streets, live music pulsing into the night, and games scattered across nearly every lawn. It's the kind of celebration that draws out even the most reclusive neighbors. That particular year, the party was hosted by Jason, a man who lived just 3 houses down from mine. Jason was in his early 40s, a big guy with a booming voice and a reputation that made people tread lightly around him. Most knew him as someone who could explode over the smallest inconvenience. I'd seen him blow up during past gatherings, over a spilled drink, a parking disagreement, even a misfired joke. His parties were lively, sure, but they always carried an undercurrent of tension, like everyone was dancing on a tightrope. That Halloween night, my friend Ben and I arrived just after sunset. The air was sharp and cool, scented with fallen leaves and distant bonfires. Kids raced down the street in colorful costumes, their laughter echoing through the crisp night. Orange lights flickered from porches and trees, giving everything a warm, haunted glow. Jason had gone all out. He'd rented a bounce house for the kids, set up right next to his wooden backyard deck. Speakers played upbeat Halloween tracks, and people moved easily between laughter and chatter. We joined in, greeting neighbors and soaking in the festive mood. For a while, everything felt perfect. Later, Ben and I drifted toward the front yard to escape the crowded backyard. It was quieter there, peaceful even. That's when I noticed Fred. Fred had always been different. In his early 30s, he was the neighborhood's longtime troublemaker. Tonight, he was dressed as a clown, but not the fun kind. His makeup was smudged from hours of sweating and stumbling, and his eyes, glassy and vacant, told me he was either drunk, high, or both. He staggered up to us, slapped a hand on my shoulder, and mumbled something about going into the bounce house. His breath reeked. We declined, trying to keep it light, and he just gave a weird chuckle before lurching off toward the backyard. Minutes later, the party shattered. A scream rang out, high-pitched and full of panic. Then 2 teenage girls came sprinting around the side of Jason's house, their faces pale and twisted in fear. My stomach dropped. Ben and I rushed toward the backyard. Chaos. People were scattering in every direction. Jason's neatly mowed lawn was now a mess of overturned chairs, spilled drinks, and screaming voices. And then I saw him, Fred. He stood alone, clown paint dripping down his face, chest heaving. But what chilled my blood wasn't his twisted expression. It was the gun in his hands, an actual AK-47 glinting beneath the dim string lights. Time froze. I remember thinking it had to be fake, a propriedad, some sick joke. But the way people screamed, the way they dove behind fences and cars, this was real, terrifyingly real. Later we learned what had happened. Fred had climbed into the bounce house, scaring the kids with wild yelling and erratic movements. Jason confronted him. Words turned into shouts. Jason's friend, an off-duty cop attending the party, helped pull Fred out. Humiliated, Fred stormed off. No one knew he'd come back armed. Now he stood in the middle of the backyard, yelling threats at no one in particular, waving the gun like a madman. The joyful glow of the party had turned cold. People cowered behind hedges and trash bins, whispering urgently into their phones, pleading for help. It felt like an eternity. Then came the flashing red and blue lights. Slicing through the trees at the edge of the street, officers poured into the backyard, shouting commands, weapons raised. For a moment, Fred just stood there, trembling, confused. His grip tightened. I thought we were seconds away from tragedy. But slowly, agonizingly, he lowered the gun. He dropped it. Officers rushed him. No one got hurt. But the party was over. People left quietly, arms around children, voices hushed. Jason's yard, once full of laughter, now sat in eerie silence. The bounce house deflated slowly in the background like a dying heart. It's been years since that night, but the memory stays vivid. Sometimes I still see Fred's smeared face in my dreams, twisted in rage, a weapon in his hands. That Halloween changed everything. Now, when the decorations go up each October, a knot forms in my stomach. The neighborhood still celebrates, but for me, the magic of Halloween will always carry a shadow. It was a chilly October afternoon, the kind where the wind bites through your hoodie and the trees seem to whisper with every gust. I walked home from school, backpack slung over one shoulder, sneakers crunching over fallen leaves. The air smelled of wood smoke and damp earth, autumn in full swing. High school had just started, and everything still felt fresh, thrilling, unfamiliar. But something about the place made me uneasy. Maybe it was the way the school asta loomed in the distance, casting a long skeletal shadow across the ground as the sun dipped low. Or maybe it was the whispers, the ones about the old wing. I'm Ethan, just your average teenager trying to navigate grades, crushes, and not looking like a total loser. But lately, something darker had begun creeping into my mind. Quiet rumors floated through the halls about flickering lights, cold drafts, and strange noises coming from the part of the school that had been shut down for years. The abandoned wing. The one no one talked about unless they were whispering. When I got home, I tossed my bag aside and grabbed a bag of chips. My little brother Tommy was giggling at cartoons in the living room. Mom was in the kitchen, humming as she stirred something on the stove. Everything felt normal, safe, but I couldn't stop thinking about the rumors. At lunch the next day, I finally brought it up. "Have you guys heard about the old wing?" I asked Matilda and Jude, keeping my voice low. Matilda raised an eyebrow. "You mean the haunted one?" Jude snorted. "You guys believe in that stuff?" I leaned in. "What if it's not just stories? What if something actually is there?" They hesitated. Matilda chewed her lip. Jude rolled his eyes but grinned. That was all I needed. We made a plan. That afternoon, when the final bell rang, we met near the back of the school with flashlights stashed in our bags. The hallway to the old wing was colder than the rest of the building, the air dense and unmoving. Paint peeled from the walls like old skin, and each step echoed eerily around us. "This place gives me the creeps," Matilda whispered. "Just stick close," I said, though my voice shook a little too. We reached a heavy metal door with a crooked sign above it, "Authorized personnel only." I pushed it open with a loud creak. The air inside was musty and thick, like something had been festering. Our flashlights flickered against cracked walls and broken tile. As we explored, I noticed a glint in the corner of the room, something half buried under a pile of ashes. It was an old yearbook. Its pages were yellowed, the photos faded, smiling students from decades ago, frozen in time. But near the back, we found something unsettling, a memorial page. A fire had torn through this wing years ago, killing several students. The cause? Still unknown. "What the hell?" Jude muttered. A loud creak stopped us cold. The door we'd entered was swinging shut. None of us moved. The wind howled outside, but inside, it was dead silent. Jude turned to me, wide-eyed. "Did you close that?" I shook my head. My chest tightened. Matilda's flashlight flickered again. "We need to leave," she said. Just as we turned back, a gust of air swept through the room, snuffing out our flashlights. Total darkness. "Not funny," Jude snapped, fumbling with his light. Then a whisper, soft at first, a breath in the silence. "Help us." The voice was everywhere, around us, inside us. We didn't wait. We ran, stumbling, hitting walls, knocking over debris. Something unseen brushed against my neck. Matilda screamed. The door flew open with a deafening bang, and we burst through it into the night. We collapsed on the grass, gasping for breath. "What just happened?" Matilda asked, shaking. "I don't know," I said. "But we shouldn't have gone in there." None of us ever spoke of that day again. Not to our parents, not to our classmates. But every October, when the wind starts to howl and the leaves begin to fall, I remember. And sometimes, when the world goes quiet, I still hear that whisper. "Help us." Whether it was the voices of lost students or something far darker, I never went back to find out. I remember thinking it was the perfect arrangement. Robert, someone I'd known for about a year, needed a roommate at the University of Pennsylvania's Lincoln Hall, and I needed a spot in the dorms. We were both majoring in information technology. He had even helped me install Arch Linux on my laptop, which, to any techie, feels like a brotherhood. It seemed like a win-win. At first, everything felt normal. We'd go to coding classes together, grab dinner at the cafeteria, talk about software updates or the latest console releases. There was even laughter in those early days. I thought I'd lucked out, but then things shifted. It began with something small. Robert's lights out rule. Not a suggestion, a rule. At exactly 11 p.m., the lights had to be off. Not 11:01, not 11:00 and 10 seconds. If I so much as rustled a paper or coughed too loudly past that sacred minute, he'd snap. The anger in his voice didn't match the offense. It was disproportionate, sharp, and terrifying. Then came the missing $50. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe it slipped out of one of my coat pockets. My winter jacket had plenty of those. But the feeling stuck with me, especially when Robert started asking for things. My bus pass, my headphones, little things, at first. Then he asked me to front cash for things he wanted. Promises of, "I'll pay you back next week," echoed too often. One time, he borrowed my bus pass and refused to return it, even after I asked 20 times. I needed it for a job interview at McDonald's. He held on to it like it was his. When I finally got it back, I'd missed the last bus. I walked through snow that reached my knees, feeling the cold seep into my bones, and something darker settle in my chest, a sinking feeling. I tried to rationalize. He was on new meds, after all. Mood swings were a side effect. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe I just needed to breathe. Then came the gaming console incident. He wanted my brand new Nintendo 3DS, a $109 treasure from cartridges galore. He offered to trade his older 2DS. We agreed to do a quick system transfer. I trusted him. He kept both. Days passed. Excuses stacked up. When I asked for my 3DS back, he smiled like it was some kind of joke. When I threatened to call the police, he laughed, told me I was being dramatic. But I did call, and thankfully, the dorm counselors stepped in. I got the 2DS back, but not the trust. The final straw came one icy night, after my shift at McDonald's. I unlocked the door to find Robert storming in behind me. He slammed the door so hard the walls seemed to shake. He didn't hit me, but the look in his eyes, the fury, was worse. I froze. I have PTSD, that kind of rage. It shuts me down. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. My heart was a drumbeat in my ears. The walls felt like they were closing in. The moment he stepped out, maybe to use the bathroom, I crawled under my bed and stayed there for hours. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think, just waited, hoping he wouldn't come back. The next morning I called my psychiatrist. I explained everything. By the end of the day, I was holding a new set of dorm keys, a private room, a safe place. I packed in a blur, barely folding my clothes. I didn't care about neatness. I just needed out. When my mom called later, I lied, said the neighbor next door played loud music and made racist jokes. She heard the tremble in my voice, but didn't push. Maybe she knew not to. I still wonder about that $50. Did Robert really take it? Or was it one of his friends? I'll never know. But that mystery gnaws at me more than it should. Because deep down, I don't want to believe someone I trusted could use me like that. But they did. I'm sharing this because sometimes horror doesn't come with blood or ghosts. Sometimes it's a locked door, a whisper past curfew, the fear of footsteps returning. Sometimes the most terrifying thing is sharing a small room with someone who slowly becomes a stranger and knowing you can't leave.